Jake Thompson had just kicked off his boots, easing himself into his recliner like a man who'd earned his peace. Steam curled from the coffee mug in his hand, and the remote sat cool against his palm. Outside, the morning was still and quiet, the kind of day you hope for when you've spent years keeping law and order in a town that didn't always make it easy. He took a sip. Bitter, strong, exactly how he liked it. Then someone tried to tear his front door off its hinges. The pounding wasn't casual. It was frantic, sharp, like whoever was on the other side thought they were serving a warrant on a fugitive. Jake sighed. The cup clinked against the side table as he set it down. Probably just some kid selling magazines. Or worse, someone trying to talk him into switching phone plans. But when he opened the door, he nearly burst out laughing. Three men stood on his porch, dressed in uniforms that didn't quite fit. Cheap fabric stretched tight over bellies that hadn't seen a sit-up in years. Badges gleamed in the sunlight, the kind you might win at a county fair or pull from a cereal box. The tallest one had a mustache that could house a family of sparrows and mirrored sunglasses that didn't hide the fact he was sweating bullets. "Sir," Mustache said, his voice dropping an octave, trying hard to sound like he meant business, "we need you to step outside." Jake crossed his arms. "And you are?" "We're with the HOA enforcement unit," the man announced, standing a little straighter, like he expected Jake to salute or something. His two partners nodded in solemn agreement. Jake studied them. "The HOA has an enforcement unit now?" "We do," Mustache replied, tapping the shiny badge on his chest. "And we take non-compliance very seriously." It was almost too ridiculous to believe. Jake had heard rumors about his HOA getting out of hand. But this was cartoon-level nonsense. He glanced at the badge again. It caught the light but didn't exactly scream authority. Then Mustache reached into his pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, flipping it open like it was an arrest warrant. "You've been cited," he declared, "for an unapproved mailbox design." Jake blinked. "My mailbox?" He looked past them at the perfectly ordinary black mailbox sitting by the curb. Nothing fancy. Standard issue. It had probably been there since before these clowns could grow a mustache, let alone fake one. "It doesn't meet the HOA's latest aesthetic guidelines," one of the sidekicks chimed in, consulting his clipboard like he was reading off some top-secret dossier. "Section 4, subsection B, line 12. Jake cocked his head. "Am I lawn furniture?" Mustache hesitated, glancing at his clipboard, then back up. "Also unapproved." He gestured toward the porch where two regular Adirondack chairs sat peacefully under the morning sun. "So let me get this straight," Jake said, his voice calm. "You're here to arrest me? Over a mailbox and patio chairs?" "This isn't a joke," Mustache snapped. He took a step forward, puffing his chest again. "Non-compliance is a serious offense. You're coming with us." Jake didn't move. "And where exactly do you plan on taking me?" "To our holding facility." Jake arched a brow. "The HOA has a jail now?" "It's not a jail," Mustache corrected. "It's a compliance center." That did it. Jake laughed. Out loud. It wasn't polite or restrained. It was a full-bellied chuckle that echoed off the front porch. These guys had lost their minds. "I'm busy today," Jake said, wiping his eyes. "So I'll have to decline." Mustache's patience snapped. "Turn around," he barked. "Hands behind your back." Jake stayed put. Or what? One of the lackeys stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs so flimsy they looked like they'd snap if you breathed on them too hard. "Do it now, sir, or we'll be forced to take action." Jake sighed and slowly turned. Not to surrender, but to reach for the small radio clipped to his belt. He pressed the button, sending a silent distress call to his deputies without breaking eye contact. Mustache's grin returned. "That's right," he said. "You're learning." Jake's lip twitched. "Oh, I know exactly where I stand." As soon as the lackey reached out with the cuffs, Jake moved. Fast. In one motion, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and shoved him face first against the nearest car. The guy yelped, his cheek hitting metal with a hollow thud. Mustache stumbled back, eyes wide. "What the hell are you doing?" Jake tightened his grip. "Performing a citizen's arrest." The second lackey fumbled for something on his belt. Probably another citation book or a laminated compliance guide. But froze when sirens wailed in the distance. Within seconds, two squad cars screeched to a stop at the curb, red and blue lights slicing through the morning calm. The fake officers looked like they'd just been caught looting a bank. Deputy Carter climbed out of his cruiser, one hand resting on his belt. He took in the scene. Jake pinning a wannabe cop to a car hood, two others standing frozen in polyester uniforms. "Boss," Carter said slowly, "any reason you're wrestling with a guy who looks like he's late for a costume party?" Jake released his grip and stepped back, brushing his hands off like he'd finished taking out the trash. "These three were attempting an unlawful arrest," he said. "Figured I'd save them the trouble of doing it wrong." Carter gave a low whistle. "Let's see some IDs." Mustache tried to reclaim his dignity, straightening his fake uniform. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "We're authorized HOA enforcement officers, carrying out our duties." Carter raised an eyebrow and plucked the man's badge from his chest. He turned it over in his hand, squinting at the engraved letters. "ACHY Compliance Officer," he read aloud, then glanced at Jake. "This a joke?" Jake shrugged. "Wish it was." "We have full legal authority," Mustache insisted. "We can issue citations and enforce community standards." "Really?" Carter said flatly. "And who exactly gave you that authority?" "The Homeowners Association Security Division," Carter snorted. "That's not a thing." The second lackey stepped up, still rubbing his wrist where Jake had bent it backward. "It is," he insisted. "We have jurisdiction over the entire neighborhood." Carter turned back to Jake. "Boss, you approve that?" "Nope." Carter gave Mustache a long look. "Then I guess you're just three guys in cheap uniforms playing pretend." "You don't understand," Mustache protested. "We were enforcing compliance. We have every right to detain rule breakers." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Detain? You tried to slap cuffs on me over a mailbox." Mustache's mouth opened, then closed. "Well, technically." "No technically about it," Jake said, his voice low and cold. "You impersonated law enforcement, and depending on what you plan to do after detaining me, we might be talking about unlawful restraint. Or worse." Carter folded his arms. "Let's start with some real names and real IDs." After a long moment, the three men reluctantly handed over their wallets. Carter flipped through them, his smirk growing with every card. "Not one of them's a licensed security guard," he said to Jake. "No certifications. Not even registered." Jake blew out a breath. "They're not even rent-a-cops?" "Nope," Carter confirmed. "Just some guys in uniforms they probably bought online." Mustache shifted, his bravado unraveling fast. "We were following orders," he said quietly. Jake's eyes locked on his. "Whose orders?" "The HOA board." Jake crossed his arms. "You have paperwork to back that up?" The second lackey pulled out a crumpled form from his pocket and handed it over. Carter took one look and shook his head. "This isn't a contract," he said. "It's a volunteer neighborhood watch application." Jake skimmed it and sighed. "So you three thought that gave you the green light to run around like you're the law?" "It wasn't extortion," Mustache said through clenched teeth. "It was community enforcement." Jake's stare didn't waver. "How much were you charging people for these so-called violations?" No one answered. Carter nodded toward their car. "Let's see what else they've got." He rifled through the HOA-branded SUV parked nearby and let out a whistle. "Ticket books, fine notices, and a cash box." Jake glanced back at Mustache. "You running an HOA or a roadside scam?" Mustache swallowed. "We were collecting fees." Jake shook his head. "No, you were committing fraud." And this was only the beginning. One of the lackeys blurted it out before Jake could say another word. "They told us to do it. The board promised us a cut." Jake gave Carter a look. There it was. The thread they'd been tugging on had finally unraveled. Carter was already flipping through a ledger he'd found in the SUV, scanning page after page with the practiced eye of someone used to spotting lies. "They've been hitting the whole neighborhood," Carter said after a beat. "Fake fines, intimidation, threats of foreclosure." He closed the book with a snap and turned to Jake. "And people actually paid them." Jake exhaled slowly. His patience was wearing thin. "How many homeowners?" "Dozens," Carter replied. "Maybe more." "We'll need statements." Jake stared down Mustache, who suddenly had trouble looking him in the eye. "Here's how this works. You're all being detained while we investigate. If you're lucky, you'll face fraud charges. If we find out you threatened anyone or forced them to pay, we're going to be talking about extortion. Maybe worse. Mustache's mouth opened, but the words died before they made it out. Jake gave him a hard look. You tried to put cuffs on me, Jake said. You're lucky all you're getting right now are charges. Deputy Carter stepped forward with a pair of real cuffs. All right, gentlemen, turn around. Mustache hesitated, but Carter didn't wait. He grabbed the man's wrist and spun him around, snapping the cuffs on. The two lackeys followed, both looking pale and drained of whatever courage they thought they had. As Carter read them their rights, Jake looked around. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, whispering and pointing. Some were laughing, others were angry. One woman near the front, gray-haired with a bright blue cardigan, called out, "Sheriff, does this mean we can ignore those fines they've been sticking on our doors?" Jake nodded. If they took your money, keep records. You'll want to talk to the county prosecutor. A buzz ran through the crowd. People stepped forward, one after another, each with their own story. Fake fines, threats, warnings that didn't make sense but sounded scary enough to get them to pay. Some had been charged hundreds for things as small as leaving a garden hose out overnight. Others paid cash when they were told their grass was too high by an inch. Jake listened quietly, taking it in. These people weren't rich. They worked hard for what they had, and the HOA, these clowns, had used fear to squeeze every dollar they could out of them. We'll get it back, Jake promised. There was cheering, laughter. Someone handed him a cold beer from a cooler that had magically appeared on someone's lawn. He took it with a nod, popped the top, and took a drink. The morning had started with him thinking he might get through a quiet day. Instead, he found himself in the middle of what now felt like a block party. Carter wandered over, amused. Might be the first time a sheriff's investigation turned into a community barbecue. People like seeing justice, Jake said. I get it. Well, Carter said, holding up his phone, you're about to like this. Prosecutor's office is looking into felony fraud charges. Not just for these three clowns, the whole HOA board. Jake raised an eyebrow. Felony? Yup, Carter said. And it gets better. He handed Jake a folder. Inside were financial records, sloppy but clear enough to see the pattern. Money had been moving, lots of it, and plenty of it wound up in personal accounts. The HOA president's name showed up again and again. Jake shook his head. The president's been skimming. Carter nodded. Thousands. And he funneled some straight to these fake cops. Well, Jake said, closing the file, guess we're paying him a visit. They didn't waste time. Within the hour, Jake and his deputies were parked outside the HOA office. Word must have traveled fast because the board was waiting for them. They stood in a row, lined up like school kids who knew the principal was about to hand out detentions. The president of the HOA was a thin man wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. His hands were clasped like he thought that made him look official. It didn't. He looked nervous. Sheriff, the man said with a too-wide smile, this is all a misunderstanding. Jake crossed his arms. Which part? The part where your hired goons tried to arrest me? Or the part where they've been running a protection racket? There's been confusion, the president insisted. We were maintaining order. There have been complaints. Complaints? Jake asked. About what? Mailboxes and patio chairs? A woman with short silver hair, standing next to the president, jumped in. We have to enforce neighborhood standards, Sheriff. People move here for a certain level of decorum. Jake stared at her. Is that what you call it? Shaking people down for money? They were volunteers, she said stiffly. Jake held up one of the fake citation books Carter had found. Volunteers don't issue fines. Volunteers don't threaten to arrest their neighbors. That's not volunteering. That's fraud. The board shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. The president cleared his throat. Maybe things got a little overzealous, but surely we can resolve this internally. Jake took a slow step forward. Your boys are already in custody. There's no internally anymore. Surely, the president tried again, there's an amicable solution. Jake gave him a cold smile. You want amicable? Start by refunding every dollar you took from these people. Every dime. Then we'll talk. The silver-haired woman sniffed. This is outrageous. The HOA has operated this way for years. Yeah, Jake said. And that ends today. By the time they walked out of that office, the board looked like they'd been hit by a truck. They knew it was over. Jake made sure of it. As far as he was concerned, they could try to lawyer up. It wouldn't matter. The evidence was already in the hands of people who wouldn't be swayed by golf course politics or community potlucks. Back in the neighborhood, the crowd had doubled. People were still swapping stories, still shaking their heads in disbelief. Some were laughing now that they knew it was safe to laugh. Others just looked relieved. An older man in a golf cap came up to Jake. "Sheriff," he said, "I paid them $200 last month. Said my yard decorations were excessive." He pointed to his lawn. "One bird feeder, a garden gnome." Jake nodded. "You'll get your money back." A younger woman stepped forward. "They fined me $300 for parking in my own driveway overnight." Another man spoke up. "I paid $500 because they said my grass was an inch too tall. They said if I didn't mow it by the next day, they'd double the fine." Jake shook his head. "Keep track of everything. We're sorting this out." There was more cheering. Someone cranked up a radio. Burgers started sizzling on a grill. It wasn't a bad way to spend an afternoon after all. Carter came back over, holding another file. "We've got arrest warrants being drawn up for the board. They'll be in cuffs by tonight." Jake took the file. "Good. Oh, and guess where the money was going?" Carter added. Jake raised an eyebrow. "The HOA president was skimming a cut. Thousands. Guess where he spent it? Paid for those fake cops. Paid himself a bonus. And a fancy vacation, according to the receipts." Jake shook his head. "They thought no one would notice." "Well," Carter said, "we noticed." It didn't take long. That evening, they rolled up to the president's house. Squad cars lined the street. Neighbors stood outside, watching as deputies led the board members away in cuffs. Some clapped. Others jeered. A few just looked tired. Jake leaned against his truck, watching it all. The man in the golf cap came over again. "Sheriff," he said, "you ever think about running for mayor?" Jake laughed. "I think I'll stick to being sheriff." "Well," the man said, "if you ever change your mind, you've got my vote." Jake smiled but shook his head. "Let's just get this neighborhood back to normal first." And he meant it. He'd seen enough scams and enough bullies in his time to know how they worked. But when it came down to it, Jake wasn't about politics or power. He was about doing the job, about making sure people could drink their coffee in peace without worrying about some clown in a polyester uniform pounding on their door. As the last squad car pulled away, Jake finished his beer and tipped the bottle toward Carter. "Not bad for a morning that started with a cup of coffee." Carter smirked. "You still want that quiet day?" Jake chuckled. "Maybe tomorrow." The neighborhood was already different, lighter, the way it should be. And if anyone else had ideas about running a scam on his watch, well, they'd learn real quick that Jake Thompson didn't play games.